Hello and welcome to the Rabyd Atheist. I'm Rabyd, a former pastor turned atheist, now a compassionate anti-theist. Welcome to my channel. If you want to learn how to support the channel and its mission to normalize atheism and deconversion, stay tuned to the end of the video. Today I'm responding to a video entitled, What Really Happened at Nicaea by Stand to Reason. In it, the host is responding to Involuntary Agnostic's video about 5 historical things that made her question her faith. Now, in this particular video, he's only dealing with the first of Involuntary Agnostic's objections historically, but I think it's an interesting objection that leads to another discussion. And the first is that the Council of Nicaea was determining what Scripture was, but let us hear her objection in her own words.
Top 5 bits of church history that made me start to question my faith. Number 1, the Council of Nicaea. If you're unfamiliar with it, go look it up. It doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense. Basically, a bunch of dudes got together, took all the Christian writings that had previously been considered canon, and decided some of these are canon and some of them are not. Who said those dudes got to do this? Who said those dudes had any right? Those dudes. They said it. Interestingly, this all happened way after Jesus died, and not one of those dudes had ever met the man.
There are 3 claims that Involuntary Agnostic makes for the purpose of discussion. 1, that the Council of Nicaea is the time when the New Testament was canonized. 2, that the authority that these people had to do this, they gave to themselves. And 3, that the process of canonization happened way after Jesus, his life and his ministry and his supposed resurrection. So none of the people engaged in this canonization process or event even knew who Jesus was. But let's hear what Stand to Reason's response is to her claim and her objections.
In her video, the Involuntary Agnostic offers 5 bits of church history that made her question her faith. Let's pull out the red pen and just look at the first one together. She claims that the books of the Bible, what we call the canon, were chosen at the Council of Nicaea in AD 325. This view was made popular in Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code, you know, that rigorous piece of scholarship. This idea has also been propagated by podcaster Joe Rogan.
Are you an Old Testament guy or a New Testament guy? Well, the New Testament. No, well, the New Testament was made by Constantine, who was a Roman emperor who wasn't even Christian. Because the New Testament is utter It's created by a bishop and a emperor. That's a fact. That's like established religious fact.
Even atheist activist Richard Dawkins parrots this claim in his latest book, Outgrowing God. Dawkins says the canon was largely fixed in AD 325 by a conference of church leaders called the Council of Nicaea, set up by the Roman Emperor Constantine. Here's the problem, and it's a big one. The idea that the books of the New Testament were chosen at the Council of Nicaea is absolute nonsense. It is mythology, not history.
What?
Yeah, this is true. The Council of Nicaea was not the place where the New Testament was officially declared the canon of the Church. Nicaea was largely about refuting the Arian heresy, and the main result of this council was a creed of the same name, the Nicene Creed. There is a little bit of a footnote here that Jerome does make the claim that the Book of Judith was part of the canon that the council looked at when considering the doctrines of Jesus. So there may have been some sort of process by which the Council of Nicaea picked what its authority was going to be scripturally in order to allow them to engage that question. But that is far from anything of them. Their purpose was to canonize Scripture or create a list of Scriptures that were canon. That said, Stand to Reason attacks Dawkins, Joe Rogan, and the maker of the declared fictional film. Yes, that film is clearly fictional, and the creators even said so. They are not the only ones. You know, in my own research into this topic, I found many seminaries, Bible colleges, and institutes that still make this claim as well. The fact of the matter is the claim that the Council of Nicaea is where the church canonized the Scripture is made by a lot of people on both sides of this issue. And it was kind of, well, I don't know. There seems to be, to me, a little bit of a dishonest, maybe poisoning the well idea here that Stand to Reason does here by only pointing out certain people on the opposite side of the aisle from him as doing this kind of promoting and promoting this mythology of the Council of Nicaea. Nice of him to leave that part out, but not surprising. So let's continue.
Now, I know what some of you are thinking. That's exactly what a Christian apologist would say. Okay, don't believe me? Maybe you'll believe atheist and New Testament scholar Bart Ehrman.
There's a common view, for example, that he's he popularized it, but people had this view before he came along, that the Council of Nicaea is when Christians decided which books would be in the New Testament. Where did you finally get a canon of the New Testament? Who decided those books? Oh, it was at the Council of Nicaea. Wrong! They didn't even talk about it.
The fact is, the Council of Nicaea had nothing to do with choosing books. The primary purpose was to discuss how to understand Jesus' divinity in light of his humanity. By the way, this isn't secret information. It's readily available to anyone interested in the truth. What's really tragic is that this complete fabrication of history has caused some to question and even leave their faith.
Yeah, this is the end of his video and his response to Involuntary Agnostic. But I'm going to have to ask him to probably pull that red pen back out. Because while you are right about the Council of Nicaea, your criticism still lacks a, shall I say, response to two other parts of Involuntary Agnostic's criticism of the church history and the canonization of Scripture that still holds some merit worth considering. Firstly, let's establish something I think you should have included at this point, which is answering the question, well, then how was the New Testament canonized if it wasn't at the Council of Nicaea? I'm going to give a little bit of a brief history of canonization here, but there are many other points and dots on that historical line to be made. But I think this brief history will go to Involuntary Agnostic's main point about this. Marcion of Sinope was the first to give his opinion on what the canon of the New Testament should be. He chose 10 letters of Paul and an edited version of Luke. Yeah, he edited Luke himself, kind of indicating that what these people actually felt about the canon of Scripture was the fact that many times they edited it and changed it. He was also the first to use the idea of canon, that is, a measuring line to determine which scriptures were genuinely scripture and authoritative and which were not. Marcion was eventually declared to be a heretic, but the idea of canonization stuck. Arianus is the first to propose the four Gospels we know today as canon, but it's not until the early 3rd century that you actually see the canonical works used by theologians in the church that include all 27 books of the New Testament. The point is there's a lot of debate as to what the canon and what it was not, all the way back to 3 centuries and beyond. Origen uses all 27 books, but includes others that people rejected as canon later, as an example. And why Irenaeus did give us all four Gospels, he speaks quite literally 100 years after the life of Jesus. So there's a lot of things where people were making these declarations of what the canon of Scripture should be, but nobody was being definitive, and nobody was actually taking upon themselves the authority to say that these are the canonical works. The fact is, what was canon as far as the New Testament was very much up in the air. In 331, Constantine supposedly did commission 50 Bibles for the church. And when you look at all the codex lists at that time and the various codex that were being approved at that time, you usually see in these codexes a full version of the Septuagint, plus all the apocryphal books, the books of the New Testament, plus many other Christian books would find their way into these codexes and these produced Christian Bibles. It wasn't just the 66 books of the Protestant Bible, but many other books were included as well. If you want an actual council where the canonization of Scripture probably took place, it's probably when the Catholic Church actually affirmed their canon of Scripture at the Council of Rome in 382. Then they had to do it again at the Synod of Hippo at 393, Carthage in 397 and 419, Florence again in 1431 to 1449. In all cases, the Catholic Bible is the Old Testament, the Apocrypha, and 27 New Testament books. But why so many councils to do that and over a great period of time? Because of controversy surrounding the canonization of Scripture. After the Reformation by the Protestants, they held their own councils and rejected the Apocrypha and kicked it out of their Bible, thus giving us the 66 books of the Protestant Bible. It could be noted that Revelation has always been and will continue probably to be a hotly debated book to this day as to whether it is canon. And Martin Luther himself nearly rejected the Epistle of James and kicked it out of the canon and called it an epistle of straw. So the idea that somehow these were so authoritative that people didn't question them or get rid of them is just completely untrue. My point is this, that what was canonized was part of a long debate, politics of the church, and in many cases, just what was popularly believed to be inspired. That the councils that did eventually affirm a canon were debated and other councils later had to reaffirm that council. Things just reaffirm things because of changes. And sometimes other people still wanted to get their popular, very inspirational books into the canon. In the case of many church splits, what is canonized authority for the splinter group is often the first debate that they have, and often ends up with a different canon, just as in the case of the Protestant Reformation. This is a very human decision-making process in which people gave themselves the authority to make these decisions and often use political power to reinforce or silence or remove critics. So, involuntary agnostic is correct if we apply our words to the whole process of canonization with its many changes, twists, and turns. But the third thing she said is also true, that these are really all people in the end of a long game of telephone deciding what they think accounts for the true accounts of Christ and the church. None of them knew Jesus, the apostles, or anybody involved. See, here's the thing, and it comes down to, the canonization of Scripture. There was always this hot debate, and still is. That's the problem. What constitutes Scripture still is around. I could add the debates that the Mormons add when they threw in Joseph Smith's words in the Book of Mormon. He had said, well, why is the canon closed? Why don't we add other books? Who said that these people had the authority to close the canon? Okay, and so when you look at it, there's no God, Archangel Gabriel coming down and saying, this is the list of canonical scriptures. What you have in the process of canonization is a very human thing where people take upon their authority for themselves to produce these lists of what constitutes the real books, the real authority of the church. And we look at many things like the Protestant Reformation. They took it upon themselves to not only reaffirm some of the canon, but reject some of it. The fact of the matter is, human beings have taken upon themselves to declare what their holy books are. And the Christian canonization of Scripture, of their scriptures, both the Catholic Church, the Orthodox Church, the Protestant churches, and so on and so forth, has been a long human process, and purely human. There is no God declaring these things. These people took it upon themselves to decide what was canonical Scripture. And this is why I think Stand to Reason doesn't really bring this out, because even if he points out the flaw in involuntary agnostic's reasoning in the fact that the Council of Nicaea wasn't the place where Scripture was canonized, that is true. They got that part right. He doesn't hit the rest of her objections when it comes to the canonization of Scripture in general. Sorry, it is very true that all of these councils, all these people and throughout history that have taken it upon themselves to decide what is canonical have taken it upon themselves. Who gave them this authority? Themselves. And the third objection that she has is also equally true, that none of these people that have ever been involved in the canonization of Scripture were personally involved in the life of Jesus in any way, shape, or form. So the fact of the matter is 90%, 66% to 90% of her understanding of why this is problematic is actually pretty true. And it is a good reason, I think, to leave the faith. When you suddenly realize that you're just having a bunch of people taking upon themselves to canonize Scripture so that they have authority to tell people what to do, then it becomes pretty sketchy, and it becomes pretty, lame that they do that. Okay, this is not something that is, comes out of the sky, that these are the canonized works of Scripture. Bart Ehrman rightly points out that this is a long, arduous process that over time people just, accepted because of popularity that these certain things are canonized and other things are not. And so, I think I'm going to come to involuntary agnostic's defense a little bit. While she may have been wrong about the Council of Nicaea, and she's not the only one, there are Bible colleges, seminaries, and Bible institutes that are wrong about this too. Not just Joe Rogan, not just Dawkins, and not just the creator of a fictional film. These things are wrong all the way around the board. There's a lot of times that people get history wrong, and it becomes very popular what the error is the error becomes more popular than anything else. So that is true. So what do I do with this? Well, I think Stand to Reason should have done its own version of what the canonization of Scripture actually involved. But I think they didn't do that because they knew that this would still leave the main objections of involuntary agnostic up there. It's kind of dishonest in the fact that it's kind of omitting some key information in their criticism of involuntary agnostic's first point about the historical events that caused her to lose her faith. They should have included the real canonization of Scripture, but then that would have left them open to criticism about that process. Well, she's still right about the other 2 points. And so, yeah, that's probably why you didn't include it, didn't you? So, well, that's it for this one. I'm interested to hear what everybody thinks. But for me, the canonization of Scripture was an issue because while I tried to make the theology make sense and I was more focused on the biblical theology and biblical interpretation as a theologian, I did realize that the canonization of Scripture did present, shall we say, some very critical problems, namely that who are these people to decide what canon is? I guess I had the same objections that Joseph Smith had in a way. Why is the canon closed? What's so important about it? And, who are these people to have the authority to close it? Sorry, it's a valid question. So that kind of leaves that one there. So I'd be interested in hearing what you have to think. But, as always, thanks for stopping by, and I appreciate every like, share, and subscribe. If you want to support the channel in many tangible ways, super chat, super thanks. My PayPal link is in the description. I always appreciate the donations. Those are always welcome. Thank you very much. But the best way to support the channel is with membership. So if you want to become a member, it only costs $2 a month, and that helps me to focus more on doing the videos that you come to like and enjoy instead of worrying about the YouTube algorithm so much. So thank you once again for stopping by and doing all the things that you do. I appreciate the support. We're always trying to normalize atheism and deconversion here, so thank you very much. And as always, live your best life. You only got one go around, so make sure it's a good one by taking all your time, money, and opportunities and spending them on yourself, the people you love and care for, and to make this a better world. You'll be happier if you do, and don't waste them on the trappings of religion and faith. I speak from experience. And as always, thanks for stopping by, and I'll catch you next time.